I beg to differ. If there was one place in the world that Ross really loved, it was his favourite corner of his favourite pub, the King's Head. It wasn't that Ross drank very much or very often. In fact, he only went to the pub 3 times a week. He went on Monday evening with his wife Carol. He went on Thursday evening after golf. And he went on Sunday afternoon before a late Sunday roast that Carol always cooked. Now, some people might think that him going to the pub and leaving Carol to cook the lunch was a bit old-fashioned. However, Carol was always the first one to suggest he went. So, at about 12 o'clock each Sunday, Ross picked up his newspaper, walked to the pub, and joined 3 old friends. There was his golf partner Jimmy, Paul, a friend from work, and Stan, a neighbour. Ross couldn't really explain why he loved those few hours on a Sunday afternoon, but it was mainly because of the interesting discussions that he and his friends always had. "What do you talk about?" Carol often asked. "Football?" "No," Ross said. "No, we don't actually. We talk about lots of different things. You know, life, the universe, everything." Carol laughed at that, so Ross decided not to tell her exactly what they talked about on those quiet Sunday afternoons. "So," said Jimmy one wet autumn afternoon, "what's the topic for today?" he asked as he put his drink down on the table. "You're late," said Stan, who folded up his paper and took out a small notepad. "And we've not decided on the topic yet. Does anyone have a suggestion, or should we let the bag decide?" And Stan put a tiny black bag on the table. "What about Brexit?" Paul suggested. "Again?" said Ross. "No way. How about global warming?" "No," said Stan, who looked at his notebook. "We spoke about that 2 weeks ago. I think we should let the bag decide." "Yeah, me too," said Jimmy. "Last week the bag suggested war, and that was pretty interesting. But remember, whatever we pick, we can't change it." The 4 men nodded, and Stan opened the small bag and picked a piece of paper. Right," he said, and he coughed awkwardly. "Today our topic is fashion." For a moment nobody spoke. "Fashion?" said Ross. "Who put that in there?" "We cut up the discussion topics from that magazine, remember? Anyway, we should be able to politely and intelligently discuss any topic, even fashion." The 3 men nodded in agreement, but then there was another long silence. "Well," said Paul after some time, "in my opinion, jumpers are quite good, and I think they always will be. Do you know what I mean?" Jimmy and Stan nodded, but Ross shook his head. "Well, I'm afraid I have to disagree with you, Paul. Yes, jumpers are good now, but will they always be? I don't think so. I think that global warming will make the earth too hot for jumpers one day." "That's a good point," said Stan. "What do you think, Jimmy?" "Well, I can see where Paul is coming from, but I think it's silly to say jumpers will always be good." "Oh, so I'm silly, am I?" said Paul. "That's not very polite. I thought there was a rule about not saying things like that." "I didn't say you were silly, Paul. I said your idea was silly." "Well, you're both wrong. In 100 years, people will be wearing a nice jumper to the pub on a Sunday afternoon," Paul said, his voice suddenly quite loud. Jimmy and Stan started to say something, but Ross loudly said, "I beg to differ. Jumpers in 100 years? You're crazy." And so Their discussion very quickly became an excited argument, and after a moment the barman had to come over to them and ask them to stop. "What are you arguing about anyway?" the barman said when they were finally quiet. The four men looked at each other, coughed awkwardly, then said at the same time, "Football."